Super cool doomsday story. Floods, extreme cold, high temperatures, earthquakes, tsunamis, insect disasters, acid rain. The female protagonist, who is an orphan, experienced all of the above natural disasters in just 3 years. Jessica has customized many plans for herself. For example, she exercises for 2 hours every day and reads for 2 hours. In the afternoon, Ida knocks on Jessica's door with a bottle of solid alcohol. She is surprised to see the vegetables and rabbits that Jessica has grown on her balcony. She says, "Barry said that if Doomsday comes, only you can survive." Jessica explains that it was just a coincidence. She received a survival kit from Jim when she was buying supplies from him earlier. While the two of them were chatting in the living room, Ida suddenly points to the balcony and shouts, "There's a tornado coming." Jessica looks in the direction she's pointing and is shocked to see twin tornadoes. They are moving in opposite directions and crushing everything in their path, lifting it into the air. In just a few minutes, the city is reduced to ruins. It's the first time Jessica has seen twin tornadoes, and even the skyscrapers that the typhoon couldn't destroy in her previous life are now demolished by these tornadoes. Ida grabs Jessica's hand and asks, "Is this still a typhoon? How can a typhoon have such destructive power?" Luckily, it's not coming towards us, or else we would have been swept away long ago. At this moment, cries of a woman came from the opposite building. The two of them looked up and saw a woman holding a child on the balcony of the highest floor. She jumped down towards the ground and sank into the water. Ida was shocked. She couldn't understand why the woman would commit suicide and still bring the child with her. Even if there was a typhoon, there was no need to jump off the building. The poor child. Just then, Barry ran over to them and said, "I know this woman. Her husband is having an affair and has a love child outside. He gave all his assets to his mistress and didn't care about the woman and the child. A woman carrying a child, they probably have no food. They must be desperate. I can't bear to watch anymore." Ida and Barry returned to 1603. To lighten the mood, Jessica took out a portion of potato beef to eat and found a comedy movie to watch. The next day at noon, Amy knocked on Jessica's door. These past few days, Amy always came at exactly 12 o'clock and would squat next to the two rabbits for a long time after entering. By chance, Jessica noticed that Amy had many bruises on her body. Amy said her brother was the one who hit her. Jessica was very angry and only found out after asking that Astor would teach Amy boxing every day, which resulted in the scrapes and bruises. Jessica couldn't understand why a typhoon weather would train a child to box, and why in the previous life, she didn't see anyone living in 1602. Does Astor know about the end of the world, which is why he is training Amy? Despite her doubts, Jessica didn't ask too many questions. She just took out some medicine and helped Amy apply it. These days, there have been more and more fights downstairs, and there have even been physical conflicts. Due to the rising water level, the residents on the second floor have also moved into the hallway. Many door locks have been pried open in the past few days, and the people prying the doors are all in groups. It's obvious that they are from the hallway. The life-saving food has been stolen, and no one can tolerate it. Therefore, arguments have turned into fights, and the entire building has become chaotic. Everyone is fighting for food, just wanting to fill their own stomachs. The evil of human nature is breeding madness. At midnight 2 days later, while Jessica was exercising, she suddenly heard the sound of prying doors. Jessica took out the night vision goggles from her space and the butcher knife she had purchased earlier, and forcefully opened the door. She stabbed the people outside the door several times. There were a total of 4 people who broke into the door. In the end, Jessica stabbed 2 of them to death. The remaining 2 stood far away and quickly escaped. Jessica had no idea that rumors were spreading in the building that there was a lot of food in her place, and that the homeowner was a female college student. These 4 individuals wanted to steal her food and also play with her. However, they could never have imagined that the female college student was a heartless killer. Just as Jessica was finishing off the 2 individuals, Astor walked out. He didn't say a word and threw one of the men out of the window. Seeing that Jessica didn't react, he whispered, "You're right. Keeping people like them is a threat." Jessica nodded in agreement. Astor quickly fixed the lock on the stairwell and returned to his room. Jessica took a shower in her space and quickly fell asleep. The water level rose again the next day. Jessica stood on the balcony, looking at the garbage and corpses floating in the water. She didn't feel like eating breakfast anymore. Every day, Jessica could see people swimming out, but she never saw anyone come back. The knocking on the stairwell door became more frequent these days. At noon, Ida ran over. She had been listening in the stairwell for a long time in the morning. Last night, a girl's door was forced open. Not only was all the food stolen, but the girl was also taken advantage of by them. Jessica said that our floor was no longer safe. In the early morning, Jessica was awakened by Ida's knocking. Jessica opened the door and saw Astor and Barry coming out as well. Both of them were holding weapons. The people who had forced the locks threatened, "Quickly hand over the food, or else you will die." Jessica angrily said, "We don't have any food." "Then why did you install a door in the stairwell?" We're all starving to death. Yet you're eating all the rations yourselves. Jessica said, "So you want to rob us, huh?" Jessica knew. Although only a few people broke open the door, there were more people hiding in the shadows. Today, we won't mercilessly kill a few, but more will come up in the future. At this moment, several people downstairs rushed up with fruit knives. However, 5 minutes later, out of the 6 people who rushed up, Jessica injured 3 of them. The remaining 3 had their arms cut off by Ida. Jessica held a blood-stained kitchen knife and shouted towards the stairwell, "Do you want food or your lives? Choose one." The man moaned while clutching his wound. "How dare you kill people? This is against the law." Jessica said again, "I know it was you who stole the food from the girl on the 9th floor and insulted her." The group of people felt guilty. At this moment, Jessica and the others united to defeat these people. Several people knelt on the ground, begging Jessica to spare them. Jessica thought that the deterrent effect had already been achieved. There was no need to kill anymore. Seeing that Ida and Aster had no objections, she spared them. The deterrent effect this time was quite good. For the next few days, no one came to knock on the door of the stairwell. On the 15th day of the typhoon, Jessica pulled open the curtains in the morning. The sky was still gloomy. There was no sign of the typhoon weakening. Jessica's worries came true. The disaster was different from the previous life. Natural disasters would not end. Every day, Jessica relied on sound to analyze if the wind outside had gotten stronger. On the 18th day, Jessica could tell that the sound of the wind was different from usual. Although it looked big, the wind force was clearly decreasing, but the heavy rain became even heavier. The rainwater had already flooded the 3rd floor. The conflicts in the hallway were still intensifying. At this moment, the sound of a motor suddenly rang out. The rescue team in red life jackets stood on the speedway. They had been cut off from the outside world for a whole 18 days. Finally, at this moment, they saw hope. When they saw the rescue team, everyone was moved to tears. The officials did not abandon them after all. Then someone shouted through a loudspeaker, "Everyone, don't worry. We will not leave anyone in need behind. Come one by one. Let's start by evacuating the elderly and children." The main focus of the rescue team this time was the residents below the 3rd floor who were submerged. However, people from the higher floors rushed up and surrounded the rescue team. "We have run out of food. We have been hungry for 3 days. Why didn't you bring food?" People shouted, their words becoming increasingly harsh. Gratitude turned into complaints. Ida thought about her dwindling rice supply and wanted to go downstairs with Jessica to assess the situation. If possible, she also wanted to go to the shelter. Jessica said, "The Genshio community is located at such a high altitude, yet it has been flooded up to the 3rd floor. The situation in other areas affected by the disaster will only be worse. The water level is so high that any edible food would have been soaked. The officials can only use large office buildings as shelters. With so many people crowded in the shelters, food and waste are major issues." Jessica remembered the time in her past life when many people moved to the shelter. However, they returned after only a few days because there were too many people in the shelter. It was filled with fights, food theft, and stealing. There wasn't even a place to sleep. At 5 o'clock in the evening, the typhoon stopped, but the heavy rain continued to pour. Apart from the sound of rescue teams driving their boats back and forth, the entire city was eerily quiet. Jessica set her alarm clock to ring every hour until the rescue team took all the residents below the 3rd floor. She put on the thermal suit she had purchased earlier and layered it with a raincoat. She quietly opened the door and walked downstairs. When she reached the 3rd floor, Jessica opened the window and took out the rubber boat, sliding away into the distance. The torrential rain and flood turned the entire city into a sea, with only the higher floors remaining above water level. It took Jessica 2 hours to reach a large supermarket. Although the supermarket only had 2 floors, its location was high, even higher than many residential buildings with 4 floors. The flood had not completely submerged the supermarket. Once inside, Jessica made her way to the rooftop parking lot. Luxury cars were abandoned here like trash. Jessica spotted a camper van that seemed to be modified. The entire body and windows were bulletproof and explosion-proof. The roof even had foldable solar panels. Jessica was ecstatic. This was exactly what she needed. Jessica took out an electronic jammer. Shortly after, the car door opened. After checking, Jessica stored the RV in the space. Then she collected all the gasoline and diesel from the other vehicles and put them into the space. These were supplies that couldn't be bought in the apocalypse. When she arrived at the clothing area, Jessica casually picked up some clothes. Following that was the snack area, with various potato chips and snacks. Moving forward, there was the personal care area, with various skincare and makeup products, eye cream, face masks, and serums. On the left side of the personal care area was the tobacco and alcohol section, with red wine, beer, and cigarettes. All of these were valuable commodities in the apocalypse. If it weren't for the limited space, Jessica really wanted to take all the supplies in the supermarket. When the space was almost filled with supplies, Jessica was surprised to find other people in the supermarket. She quickly hid behind the shelves. After all, she was a girl, and she didn't know how many people were there. It wouldn't be good if they discovered the secret of her space. Jessica took out a diving apparatus from the space and dived into the water. She swam towards the fire escape channel, bypassing the second floor and reaching the parking lot on the rooftop. Before leaving, she looked at these luxury cars about to be submerged by the flood, feeling a sense of regret. When Jessica returned, the water level had risen significantly. She took out a motorboat and arrived at an electronics commercial building 3 kilometers away. Breaking the window, she crawled into the building from the 4th floor and headed straight to the solar energy store upstairs. The remaining space was filled with batteries and solar generators by Jessica. In the early morning around 5 o'clock, Jessica returned to the Jeanshio community and slowly slid her rubber boat into the community. However, at the entrance of the building, she saw 2 motorboats. A man was continuously putting things into the window. When the man turned around and saw Jessica, it turned out to be Aster. No wonder he went out every night. It turned out that he was also going to the surrounding supermarkets. Jessica went up to help, and the 2 of them silently threw their supplies into the boats. After returning to the 16th floor, they nodded at each other in agreement and went home separately. It was just dawn. Jessica knocked on Ida's door and handed over her last $2,000. The typhoon had stopped outside. "Take the money," she said quietly, "and let's go to the 4-story supermarket across the university campus. We can buy supplies there." On their way back, Jessica noticed a light on the top floor of the supermarket. Several rescue boats were also parked outside. This disaster had come unexpectedly, and even the authorities were caught off guard. Many official food reserves had been flooded, leaving most supplies submerged. There was no hope for rescue. Jessica remembered that in a previous life, the government had taken over this supermarket and turned it into a distribution center for supplies. But the typhoon had come too suddenly, and most people didn't have cash. Hunger eventually overcame reason, and they stormed the supermarket to grab supplies. Although the police had guns, they didn't dare shoot at the civilians. After all, it wasn't that they didn't have money, they just couldn't access it. Jessica had heard that a supermarket was open, but Ida was skeptical. However, she agreed to give it a try. She wanted to go with Jessica, but Jessica found an excuse to refuse. She told Ida to buy all the supplies with the money and just give her a portion when she returned. After seeing Ida off, Jessica quickly entered her space and unpacked the supplies she had collected the night before. Finally, she had organized several cubic meters of space. She didn't know how long she would survive, but these supplies should be enough for her to live for decades. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, the area downstairs became lively. The typhoon had completely stopped, and although the rain was getting heavier, the threat of the typhoon was gone. Many people were trying to go out and find supplies. Some were carrying buckets, while others were wearing life jackets. Jessica stood on the balcony, and after about half an hour, Ida and Barry returned with the supplies they had bought.